Hey everyone, welcome to the Fluent English podcast. I'm Lilly, and I'm absolutely thrilled you're here with me today. If you're new to this podcast, welcome to our community of English learners who are serious about improving their communication skills and building real confidence when speaking. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new episode. We're creating fresh content regularly to help you level up your English game, and having you as part of this journey means everything to me. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to remind you to check out our complete podcast playlist on the channel. There, you'll find hours of content designed to help you grow your English fluency, boost your confidence, and speak like a true professional in any situation. Make sure you explore those episodes because they're packed with practical tools and real-life strategies. Now, let's dive into what we're covering today. Today's episode is all about transforming the way you communicate in English. Whether you're struggling to find the right words, feeling nervous about speaking, or you just want to sound more natural and professional, this episode is designed exactly for you. I'm going to share with you the complete blueprint for mastering English communication, and trust me, by the end of this conversation, you'll have a clear roadmap forward. I'm going to share with you the complete blueprint from mastering English communication, and trust me, by the end of this conversation, you'll have a clear roadmap forward. They imagine perfect pronunciation, zero grammar mistakes, and knowing thousands of advanced vocabulary words. But that's not actually what fluency looks like in the real world. Genuine fluency is about connecting with people. It's about expressing your thoughts clearly, understanding others without constant repetition, and feeling confident enough to take risks with the language. It's the ability to navigate conversations naturally, recover gracefully when you forget a word, and keep the dialogue flowing even when things get a little complicated. Here's something important I want you to understand right from the start. Every native English speaker makes mistakes. I mean, literally every single one. They forget words, mix up verb tenses, sometimes even use incorrect grammar without even realizing it. The difference between someone who sounds fluent and someone who doesn't isn't perfection. It's confidence, clarity, and the ability to keep moving forward regardless of small errors. When you truly understand this, something shifts in your mindset. You stop being so afraid of messing up. You start taking more risks with the language because you realize mistakes are actually part of the learning process, not failures. They're evidence that you're pushing yourself and growing. This mental shift alone can transform your speaking ability more than any grammar rule ever could. Let me tell you about what I call the 3 pillars of fluent communication. The first pillar is clarity. You need to express your ideas in a way that others can understand without confusion. It doesn't matter if your accent isn't perfect or if you sometimes pause to think. As long as people understand what you're saying, you've succeeded. The second pillar is confidence. And this is interesting because confidence doesn't come from knowing everything about English. Confidence comes from believing in yourself, from speaking up despite not being completely sure, and from handling situations with composure. When you're confident, people respond to that energy, and it actually makes them more likely to understand you and work with you in the conversation. The third pillar is consistency. This means you show up every single day and practice, even if it's just for a few minutes. You can't cram English fluency. It's built through daily habits, regular exposure, and continuous practice. The people who succeed aren't necessarily the smartest or the most talented. They're the ones who show up consistently, day after day, putting in the work. Now, I want to address something that holds so many learners back: translation. If you're constantly translating from your native language into English, you're creating a huge barrier to fluency. Every time you translate, you lose speed, you lose authenticity, and you end up sounding unnatural. Native speakers don't translate. They think directly in English, and that's exactly what you need to develop. The path to thinking directly in English starts with small steps. You'll begin by describing simple things you do during your day. When you wake up, mentally note, I'm getting out of bed. When you make breakfast, think, I'm making some tea. These tiny moments are where you're training your brain to create thoughts directly in English without going through your native language first. Let's talk about the difference between what I call academic English and conversational English. Academic English is what you learn in classrooms. It's formal, structured, and follows all the rules. Conversational English is what people actually use in real life. It's more casual, it has contractions, it sometimes breaks the formal grammar rules, and it sounds natural. If you want to speak like a professional in real life, you need conversational English. You need to understand how people actually talk, not just how they're supposed to talk according to grammar textbooks. This is why listening to authentic English from podcasts, movies, interviews, and real conversations is so valuable. You're absorbing the patterns of how English is actually spoken. Here's something that surprised me when I started studying language learning science. Your brain doesn't learn languages the same way it learns math or history. Language is more like a skill, similar to playing an instrument or learning to swim. You can't just read about it or understand the theory. You have to practice the actual skill repeatedly until it becomes automatic and natural. This is why I always tell people that the foundation of fluency is repetition with variation. You take core ideas, core phrases, and core sentence structures, and you practice them over and over, but in slightly different ways. This builds both fluency and flexibility. You become comfortable with the patterns, but you also learn how to adapt them to different situations. One of the biggest breakthroughs I want to share with you today is this concept of learning in chunks rather than individual words. When native speakers talk, they're not constructing sentences word by word. They're speaking in phrases and chunks that they've heard and used many times before. For example, instead of thinking about the individual words, I go to the gym, native speakers would naturally use the chunk, I hit the gym, or I work out at the gym. These chunks are like pre-recorded patterns in their brain that they just activate and produce without thinking about individual words. This is why it's so much more effective to learn phrases rather than isolated vocabulary. When you learn, I'm getting ready for work as a chunk, you're not just learning vocabulary. You're learning word order, proper stress patterns, natural flow, and authentic usage all at once. This chunk becomes a unit in your brain that you can quickly access and produce. Let me give you some more examples of powerful chunks that native speakers use constantly. Instead of saying, "What is your occupation?" a native speaker naturally says, "What do you do for a living?" Instead of saying, "I disagree with that," they might say, I see where you're coming from, but I have to disagree. Instead of saying, I need to leave now, they say, I should probably get going. These chunks aren't just about politeness or formality. They're about sounding natural. They're about communicating in a way that native speakers recognize as authentic and familiar. When you speak in these chunks, people respond to you differently. They find your English easier to understand, more pleasant to listen to, and more professional in tone. So how do you start building your personal library of chunks? First, you expose yourself to them. Listen to English speakers in podcasts, watch interviews, watch movies or TV shows. Pay attention to phrases that native speakers use repeatedly. Notice how they greet people, how they express disagreement, how they ask for clarification, how they tell stories. Second, you write them down or save them. I know some people use flashcard apps, some people keep a notebook, some people create lists on their phones. The important thing is that you capture these chunks somewhere. Create a personal collection of phrases that you want to use in your own speaking. Third, and this is crucial, you practice using them. Don't just read them. Say them out loud. Use them in different contexts. Create sentences around them. If you learn the chunk, in my opinion, then practice saying things like, in my opinion, that's not the best approach. Or, in my opinion, we should try something different. Or, in my opinion, that movie was fantastic. When you practice chunks like this, you're doing something really powerful. You're training your mouth to produce them, you're training your ear to recognize them in future conversations, and you're training your brain to access them quickly when you need them. Over time, these chunks become so automatic that you produce them without thinking, just like native speakers do. Let me share a practical exercise you can do starting today. Take one chunk that you want to master. Let's say it's, to be honest. Practice saying it in 5 different sentences. To be honest, I didn't really enjoy that movie. To be honest, I think we should try the other option. To be honest, I'm not sure about that. To be honest, I've been having a difficult week. To be honest, that's not what I expected. As you do this exercise, you'll notice something interesting. The chunk starts to feel more natural in your mouth. The pauses become smoother. The rhythm feels more authentic. This is exactly what you're aiming for. You're training your mouth and brain to produce this chunk automatically. Confidence is something that holds so many English learners back, and I want to address it directly because it's not what most people think it is. People often believe that confidence comes from never making mistakes, from always knowing what to say, from sounding perfect. But that's not confidence. That's actually fear dressed up as perfectionism. Real confidence comes from something completely different. It comes from accepting that you're going to make mistakes, deciding that's okay, and speaking anyway. It comes from believing that you have something valuable to say, even if you don't say it perfectly. It comes from focusing on communication rather than perfection. Think about how you act when you're speaking with someone in your native language. You probably speak freely, you make jokes, you don't worry about every word choice, you just communicate naturally. That's the energy I want you to bring to English. Not the fake, perfect, overly careful energy that holds so many learners back. Here's a practical truth about confidence. You don't build it by thinking positive thoughts or reading affirmations. Those things help, but real confidence comes from doing things despite being uncertain. It comes from speaking English even though you're nervous. It comes from making mistakes and realizing that the world didn't end. It comes from pushing yourself regularly. I want to share with you a confidence-building technique that's incredibly powerful. It's what I call progressive risk-taking. You start with the easiest speaking situations and gradually work your way up to more challenging ones. You don't try to jump from never speaking to giving a presentation to 1,000 people. That's too big a leap, and it often leads to failure and discouragement. Instead, start with very low-risk situations. Maybe that's speaking English to yourself. Maybe it's ordering coffee using a specific phrase you've practiced. Maybe it's making a short comment in an online forum. Maybe it's having a brief conversation with a stranger. These small wins build momentum and gradually increase your confidence for bigger challenges. Let me outline what progressive risk-taking might look like for you. Level 1 is speaking English to yourself. You're describing your day, practicing conversations, reading aloud, listening, and repeating. There's zero judgment here. You're just getting comfortable with producing English sounds and phrases. This is where you build basic fluency. Level 2 is speaking with close friends or family members who are also learning English or who are very patient with you. The stakes are low because these people care about you and won't judge you harshly. You can practice real conversations, try new phrases, and build confidence in a safe environment. Level 3 is speaking in semi-structured situations. This might be a language exchange partner where you know the conversation will follow a certain format. Maybe it's asking questions at an English learning group. Maybe it's having a conversation with a language teacher who is trained to help you. These situations have some structure that makes them easier than completely unpredictable real-world conversations. Level 4 is speaking in real-world situations with strangers. This might be ordering food at a restaurant, asking directions, having a brief conversation with someone new. These situations happen naturally, and you have to navigate them with whatever English skills you have at the moment. Level 5 is speaking in professional or high-stakes situations. This might be giving a presentation at work, having an important conversation with a boss or colleague, participating in a meeting where your opinion matters. These situations have real consequences and require the most confidence and preparation. The key to making this work is spending enough time at each level until you feel genuinely comfortable before moving to the next level. Don't rush. Confidence is built gradually, and each successful interaction at one level prepares you for the next level. This is how real, sustainable confidence develops. Now, let's talk about pronunciation because this is something that worries a lot of English learners. They think they need to sound like a native British speaker or American speaker, and if they don't, they're failing. I want to completely reframe this for you because it's a false belief that's limiting your progress. Your goal is not to sound like a native speaker. You want people to understand you easily. You want your pronunciation to be clear enough that communication happens smoothly without constant confusion or requests for repetition. That's actually it. You don't need a perfect accent. You need clarity. Here's what I've observed from listening to successful English learners from all over the world. They might have accents. They might pronounce some words in ways that aren't typical of native speakers. But they're all highly intelligible. People understand them clearly, they communicate effectively, and honestly, most people don't even notice or care about their accent because the communication is so smooth. The pronunciation elements that matter most for clarity are stress and intonation. English is what we call a stress-timed language, which means we emphasize certain syllables and certain words while reducing others. This creates a rhythm and pattern that native speakers automatically recognize. For example, in the word record, the stress changes depending on whether you're using it as a noun or a verb. I listened to the record with stress on the first syllable. But I need to record this conversation with stress on the second syllable. These stress patterns are crucial for sounding natural, and they're more important than getting every single vowel sound exactly right. Similarly, intonation, which is the rise and fall of your voice, conveys meaning and emotion. When you ask a question, your voice usually rises at the end. When you make a statement, it usually falls. When you're surprised, your intonation might leap up. When you're sad, it might be flatter. These patterns help listeners understand not just your words, but your meaning and emotion. Here's a practical way to improve your pronunciation and clarity without obsessing over getting everything perfect. First, identify the sounds that are actually difficult for you. Not all sounds are challenging for every learner. If you're a Spanish speaker, rolling R's might not be difficult, but the TH sound might be. If you're a Japanese speaker, the R and L distinction might be challenging. Once you've identified the sounds that are specifically difficult for you, focus on those. Practice them in isolation and then in words and sentences. You don't need to spend equal time on every sound. You need to focus your energy where it will actually make a difference in your communication. Second, listen to native speakers producing the sounds and words you find difficult. Listen closely. Try to hear exactly what position their mouth is in, how their tongue is placed, what the quality of the sound is. Then try to replicate it. This process, called shadowing, is incredibly powerful for improving pronunciation. Third, record yourself and listen to your own pronunciation. This feels uncomfortable for almost everyone at first, but it's incredibly valuable. You can hear what you sound like from an external perspective. You can compare your pronunciation to native speakers. You can track your progress over time as you improve. Let me give you a specific pronunciation exercise. Choose a sentence that has some of the challenging sounds you're working on. For example, the weather is neither too hot nor too cold. This sentence has multiple TH sounds, an R sound, and varying stress patterns. Pay attention to the rhythm and the stress patterns, not just individual sounds. Then practice saying it yourself, focusing on matching the rhythm and stress pattern first. Don't worry too much about getting each sound perfectly. Just try to match the overall rhythm and pattern. Crittle, ill. Crittle, crittle, crittle. I want to spend significant time on this concept because I genuinely believe it's the single most important breakthrough that transforms learners from intermediate to fluent. Thinking in English is like the quantum leap that separates people who can communicate in English from people who truly speak English. When you first start learning English, you have no choice but to translate. You hear or read English, you translate it to your native language, you understand it, and then you translate your response back to English. This process is slow, it's cognitively exhausting, and it prevents you from speaking naturally because you're always a step behind. But as you improve, and as you build up enough vocabulary and grammar understanding, you can make a shift. You can start thinking directly in English. This doesn't mean you're perfectly fluent. It doesn't mean you understand everything. It means that instead of translating through your native language, you're thinking in English directly. The benefits of this shift are enormous. First, you speak much faster because you're not translating. You're just producing language directly. Second, you sound more natural because you're not translating English grammatically. You're producing the patterns and rhythms of English as they actually exist. Third, you can navigate complex conversations because you're thinking at the speed of the conversation rather than a step behind. So how do you develop this ability to think in English? It starts small and it starts simple. You don't begin by trying to think about complex philosophical ideas in English. You begin by narrating your day in English. When you wake up, you think, I'm waking up. As you drink coffee, you think, I'm having my morning coffee. As you get dressed, you think, I'm putting on my jeans. These simple narrations are incredibly powerful. You're training your brain to form English thoughts without going through your native language. You're building pathways in your brain that allow English thoughts to form directly. Over time, these pathways get stronger and faster. I recommend dedicating just 5 to 10 minutes each day to narrating your life in English. It can be silent thoughts, it can be whispered words, or you can say it out loud if you're comfortable doing that. The important thing is that you're creating English thoughts continuously. This habit, practiced consistently, will gradually shift your brain toward thinking in English. As you get more comfortable with simple narration, you can expand to more complex thinking. Maybe you start thinking about your plans for the day. Today, I need to finish the project at work and then I'm going to the gym. Or you think about your feelings. I'm feeling tired right now, but I'm also excited about tonight. Or you think about observations you make. It's a beautiful day outside. I wonder if I should go for a walk. The remarkable thing that happens when you practice this consistently is that it becomes automatic. After a few months of daily practice, you'll notice that you start thinking in English naturally without forcing it. You'll be going about your day and suddenly realize you've been thinking in English for the last hour without any conscious effort. You'll be going about your day and suddenly realize you've been thinking in English for the last hour without any conscious effort. This is when everything changes. Once you're thinking in English, speaking English becomes so much easier and more natural. You're not translating anymore. You're not thinking about grammar rules. You're just speaking from English thoughts directly. This is what native speakers do, and this is what separates truly fluent speakers from those who are still in the translation stage. Let me give you a specific challenge for the next week. Commit to narrating your day in English for just 5 minutes every single day. I want you to actually do this, not just think about doing it. Pick a time that works best for you. Maybe it's in the morning while you're getting ready. Maybe it's during your commute. Maybe it's before bed. Just 5 minutes. During these 5 minutes, describe everything you're doing in English. Don't worry about perfect grammar. Don't worry about finding the exactly right word. Just create English thoughts continuously. If you get stuck, use simpler words. If you forget a word, describe it differently. The goal is to keep your brain in English mode for those 5 minutes. Now let's get practical. I want to give you a toolkit of common phrases that native speakers use all the time in everyday situations. These are the chunks I was talking about earlier. These are the building blocks of natural English communication. Let's start with greetings and basic social interactions. Most learners can say, "Hello, how are you?" But native speakers use so much more variety. They might say, "Hey, what's up?" or "How's it going?" or "What's new with you?" or simply, "What's happening?" These are all ways native speakers greet people, especially people they know fairly well. If you want to sound natural when greeting someone, vary your greetings based on the context. With close friends, you might say, "Hey, long time no see," or "What have you been up to?" With coworkers, you might say, "Mornin', did you have a good weekend?" or "Hey, how's your day going so far?" With people you're meeting professionally, you might say, "It's great to meet you," or "Thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me." Now let's talk about what to do when you don't understand something, which is going to happen regularly in real conversations. This is so important because how you ask for clarification affects the flow of the conversation. If you can ask smoothly and naturally, people don't even notice that you needed clarification. You just keep the conversation flowing. Some natural ways to ask for clarification are, "Sorry, I didn't catch that. Could you say it again?" Or, "I'm sorry, could you slow that down a little bit?" Or, "I'm not sure I understood. Did you say?" Or, "I lost you there. Can you explain that differently?" Notice how these are softer and more natural than simply saying, "What?" which can sometimes sound rude. Let's move to expressing agreement and disagreement because these come up all the time in conversations. When you agree with someone, you can say, "Absolutely, I totally agree with you," or "Yeah, that makes sense to me," or "You're right about that," or simply, "I know what you mean." These sound natural and affirming. When you disagree, you want to be tactful, especially in professional situations. Instead of bluntly saying, "I disagree," you might say, "I see your point, but I think there might be another way to look at it." Or, "That's interesting, but I've had a different experience." Or, "I understand where you're coming from, but I have to respectfully disagree." Or, "I hadn't thought about it that way, but I'm not entirely convinced." These phrases allow you to disagree without being argumentative or rude. This is important for maintaining good relationships while still expressing your honest thoughts. It's the kind of nuance that separates people who just speak English from people who speak English skillfully. Let's talk about phrases for asking opinions and inviting feedback, because you'll use these constantly in professional and social situations. You might say, "What do you think about?" Or, "I'd love to hear your thoughts on this." Or, "Do you have any opinions on?" Or, "What's your take on the situation?" Or, "How do you feel about?" When you're sharing your own opinion, you can use phrases that soften it or make it sound more thoughtful. "From my perspective, in my experience, I'd say, my take on it is, based on what I've seen." These phrases introduce your opinion in a way that sounds confident but also respectful of other viewpoints. Now let's talk about phrases for handling mistakes and corrections. Because here's the thing, you're going to make mistakes when speaking English, and how you handle those moments matters. If someone corrects you, a natural response is, "Oh, you're right. Thanks for the correction." Or, "Good catch. I meant to say." These responses show that you're willing to learn and that you appreciate feedback. If you catch your own mistake, you can say, "Oh, I misspoke. I meant," or "Let me rephrase that," or "Actually, I should say it differently." This shows self-awareness and confidence. You're not getting flustered. You're just smoothly correcting yourself and moving on. Let's cover phrases for asking for help, because this is something you need to be comfortable doing. You might say, "Could you give me a hand with this? Would you mind helping me with? I'm struggling with this. Can you help? Do you have a minute to help me? I need your help with something." These phrases are polite and clear about what you need. Let's talk about phrases for ending conversations gracefully, because many learners don't know how to do this smoothly. You might say, "Anyway, I should get going," or, "Well, I'm going to take off." Or, "I need to head out, but it was great talking to you." Or, "Let's definitely catch up again soon." Or, "I'll let you go, but thanks for the chat." These endings feel natural and leave space for the conversation to potentially continue later. One of the things that separates fluent English speakers from learners is their ability to tell stories effectively. Stories are how we connect as humans. They're how we remember information. They're how we entertain and engage each other. If you want to speak English like a professional, you need to develop your storytelling ability. Storytelling doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to be a writer or a particularly creative person. You just need to be able to describe events in a way that others can follow and that captures some emotion or interest. Let me give you the basic structure that works for almost any story. First, you set the scene. You explain when this happened, where it happened, who was involved, and what the situation was. You're painting a picture for the listener so they understand the context. For example, last Saturday, I went to this little coffee shop downtown with my best friend. We hadn't seen each other in months, so we were really excited. Second, you describe what happened. You're moving the story forward, building towards something. You're adding details that make the story interesting. We ordered our coffee, found a quiet corner, and started catching up. She told me about her new job. I told her about the challenges I've been facing. We must have talked for like 3 hours without even noticing. Third, you share the conclusion or the point of the story. What did you learn? How did you feel? What was the significance of this story? By the end, we both felt so much better. It reminded me how important it is to maintain relationships with the people who matter most. I'm going to make it a priority to see her more regularly. This structure is powerful because it gives the story direction and meaning. The listener isn't just hearing a sequence of events. They're hearing a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. They understand what the story is about and why you're telling it. Let me give you some more detailed storytelling techniques that will make your stories more engaging. The first technique is sensory details. Don't just say, "It was a nice day." Instead, describe what you saw, heard, felt, tasted. The sun was warm on my face. I could hear the leaves rustling in the breeze, and the air smelled like fresh coffee. These details bring the story to life for the listener. The second technique is dialogue. If people were talking in your story, include some of that dialogue. It breaks up your narration and makes the story feel more alive. For example, instead of saying, "We talked about our jobs," you might say, "I asked her how the new job was going, and she said, 'It's amazing, but also really overwhelming.' I could hear the exhaustion in her voice." The third technique is emotion. Share how you felt during the story. This creates a connection with the listener. They don't just understand what happened, they feel what you felt. "I was so nervous about the presentation that morning. My hands were shaking as I walked to the front of the room. But once I started speaking, something clicked and I felt this wave of confidence." The fourth technique is pacing. Vary the speed of your storytelling. When describing important or exciting moments, slow down and add more detail. When describing less important parts, move more quickly. This creates rhythm and keeps the listener engaged. Let me give you a practice exercise for storytelling. Think of something that happened to you recently that was interesting or funny or meaningful. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It could be a regular day that had one interesting moment. Write it down briefly or just think through it. Now, tell the story out loud using the structure I described. Set the scene, describe what happened, share the conclusion. Try to include sensory details and emotion. If people were talking, include some dialogue. Record yourself if possible so you can listen back. After you've practiced once, tell the story again, but this time focus on making it more engaging. Add more details. Slow down at important moments. Let your emotion come through more in your voice. There's something really interesting about the difference between basic questions and questions that actually deepen conversation. Most learners can ask basic questions like, "What's your name?" or "Where are you from?" But these questions only generate short answers. They don't lead to real conversation. If you want to have meaningful conversations and truly connect with people, you need to ask better questions. You need to ask questions that invite longer, more thoughtful answers. You need to ask questions that show genuine interest in the other person. Let me give you some examples. Instead of asking, "Do you like your job?" ask, "What do you enjoy most about your work?" The second question invites the person to think about what aspects they actually enjoy and explain their feelings. You're going to get a much richer answer. Instead of asking, "Do you have any hobbies?" ask, "What do you love doing in your free time?" What's something that really makes you come alive? Now the person is thinking about things that truly matter to them, and they're going to tell you something meaningful. Instead of asking, "Where are you from?" ask, "Tell me about where you grew up. What's something memorable about that place?" Again, you're inviting reflection and meaningful sharing. There are a few techniques that make questions more engaging. First, use open-ended questions that can't be answered with just yes or no. Compare, "Do you travel a lot?" with, "What's the most interesting place you've ever traveled to? What made it so memorable?" The second version requires the person to think and reflect and share something more substantial. Second, ask follow-up questions that show you're genuinely listening. If someone tells you they're working on a challenging project, you might ask, "What's the most difficult part of it?" Or, "How are you handling the stress?" Or, "What would make it easier?" These questions show that you're engaged and interested in understanding more deeply. Third, ask questions that invite the person to share their perspective or opinion. What do you think about? How do you feel about? What's your take on? These questions value the other person's thoughts and invite them to contribute their unique perspective. Fourth, ask questions that help people reflect on themselves. What's something you learned recently? What's a challenge you're currently working through? What are you most proud of in your life right now? These questions help people think about their own experience and growth. When you ask questions like these, you're not just gathering information. You're showing respect for the other person. You're showing that you value their thoughts and experiences. You're creating space for real conversation to happen. And honestly, people respond to this. They feel heard and valued, and they open up more. Let me give you a conversation practice exercise. Imagine you're meeting someone new at a social event. Start with a basic greeting. Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Lilly. Then ask an open-ended question that invites sharing. So, what brings you to this event? Or, what do you do? Or, what's your story? When they answer, listen carefully. Then ask a follow-up question that shows you're interested in understanding more. If they say they work in technology, you might ask, what is it about technology that drew you to that field? Or, what's the most exciting project you're working on right now? Keep going with the conversation, asking thoughtful follow-up questions, showing genuine interest. Notice how the conversation deepens when you ask good questions. This is the skill that makes people enjoy talking to you. This is what separates a forgettable conversation from a meaningful interaction. I want to address vocabulary because so many learners think they need to memorize huge vocabulary lists. They think fluency is about knowing tens of thousands of words, but that's actually not accurate, especially when you're getting started. Here's the truth about vocabulary and fluency. You can have meaningful conversations with a vocabulary of just 2,000 or 3,000 words. Most educated native speakers actively use around 2,000 or 3,000 words in their everyday conversation. Yes, they know many more words passively when they read or listen, but actively use that many. So instead of trying to memorize enormous lists of advanced vocabulary, focus on building a strong foundation of practical, useful words that you'll actually use regularly. Then, as you naturally encounter words in your listening and reading, you gradually expand your vocabulary. The key to vocabulary expansion is what I call learning in context. You don't learn a word in isolation. You learn it within a sentence that shows its meaning and how it's used. When you do this, you're not just memorizing the word. You're learning its meaning, its usage, the kinds of sentences you can use it in. For example, if you learn the word procrastinate, don't just memorize that it means to delay. Learn it in sentences like, I tend to procrastinate on projects that feel overwhelming. Or, oh, I procrastinated too much on my assignment and now I'm stressed. Or, I'm trying not to procrastinate this time. I'll start working on it today. When you see the word in these contexts, you understand not just what it means, but how to use it, when to use it, what kind of sentences it typically appears in. This makes the word much more useful and memorable. Now, let me share some techniques for learning vocabulary in context. First, whenever you encounter a new word in reading or listening, try to understand it from context before looking up the definition. This active work of trying to figure out the meaning helps cement the word in your memory. Second, look up the definition, but more importantly, look at example sentences. See how the word is actually used by native speakers. Spend more time studying the example sentences than the definition itself. Third, create your own sentences using the new word. Speak them aloud. This does two things. It helps you remember the word because you're creating it actively rather than passively reading it. And it helps you learn how to produce the word correctly in sentences you create. Fourth, use the word multiple times in different contexts. If you learn a new word, try to use it in conversation or writing within the next few days. The more you use it, the more it becomes part of your active vocabulary. Let me give you a specific vocabulary learning routine. Each day, choose 1 to 3 new words that you encounter in your listening or reading. Don't choose random words. Choose words that appear useful, words that you think you might actually use. For each word, do this simple process. First, write down the sentence where you found the word. Second, look up the definition and example sentences. Fourth, create a sentence of your own using the word. Fifth, practice saying your sentence out loud. Then, over the next few days, try to use that word in real conversations or writing. You'll be amazed at how quickly these words become part of your active vocabulary when you practice them this way. Another powerful technique is what I call thematic vocabulary learning. Instead of randomly learning individual words, learn groups of related words. For example, if you're learning about emotions, you might learn frustrated, disappointed, exhausted, excited, delighted, concerned, anxious. Learning these words together helps you understand the nuances between them and gives you better options for expressing yourself. Or you might learn workplace vocabulary: deadline, assignment, colleague, project, presentation, feedback, performance. Or family vocabulary: sibling, relative, ancestor, spouse, guardian. When you learn words thematically, they stick together in your brain, which makes them easier to remember and easier to access in conversation. Let's talk about pronunciation challenges, because almost every English learner has them. Your native language has trained your mouth to move in specific ways, to make specific sounds, to have specific stress patterns. English might ask your mouth to do things it's not used to, and that feels difficult. But here's what I want you to understand. This difficulty is temporary. Your mouth is incredibly adaptable. With focused practice, you can train it to produce any English sound accurately. The key is understanding what the challenge is and practicing specifically. First, identify which specific sounds or combinations of sounds are challenging for you. It's not usually all English sounds, it's specific ones. For example, Spanish speakers often have a hard time with the English R sound. Japanese speakers often have trouble with the L and R distinction. French speakers sometimes have trouble with certain English vowel sounds. Once you've identified your specific challenges, focus your practice there. You don't need to spend equal time on all sounds. Spend your energy on the sounds that are actually difficult for you, and that will make a significant difference in how clearly people understand you. Here's a specific technique for improving challenging sounds. First, isolate the sound. Practice just that sound in isolation. For the R sound, for example, you might spend time just practicing the R sound, feeling where your tongue is positioned, what kind of vibration is happening in your throat, how your mouth is shaped. Second, practice the sound in simple words. If you're working on the R sound, practice words like read, ready, remember, really. Practice slowly and deliberately. Record yourself so you can hear what you sound like. Third, practice the sound in phrases and sentences. I'm ready to go. Remember the deadline. That's really interesting. As you use the sound in more complex language, it becomes more natural. Fourth, listen to native speakers using the sound. Pay close attention to their mouth position, their intonation, the quality of the sound. Then try to replicate it. Now, let's talk about another aspect of pronunciation that's actually more important than individual sounds. It's stress and intonation. This is the music of English, and when you get it right, people understand you much more easily, even if some individual sounds aren't perfect. In English, we stress certain syllables in words and certain words in sentences, and we use intonation, the rise and fall of our voice, to convey meaning and emotion. When you match the stress and intonation patterns of native speakers, you sound so much more natural and fluent. Here's a practice technique for improving stress and intonation. Take a sentence and listen to a native speaker say it. Pay attention not to individual words, but to the overall rhythm and flow. Listen to where the voice goes up, where it goes down, where it slows down, where it speeds up. Then practice saying the sentence yourself, trying to match the overall rhythm and intonation pattern. Don't worry about getting every sound perfect. Just try to match the music of the sentence. After you practice a few times, record yourself and compare. Let me give you a specific example. The sentence is, "I couldn't believe how beautiful the sunset was." Listen to how a native speaker says this. You'll probably hear the voice rise slightly on couldn't, then rise more on beautiful, then fall on was. There's emphasis on certain words and less emphasis on others. When you practice saying this, focus on matching that rhythm and intonation. Say it with feeling. Let your voice rise and fall like a native speaker. The more you practice with this focus on rhythm and music, the more natural your English will sound. Speed and fluency don't come from understanding English in your head. They come from your mouth and brain working together to produce English automatically. You need to practice in ways that build this automaticity. One of the most powerful ways to build speed and fluency is through what I call speed drills. You take a phrase, chunk, or short sentence that you want to become fluent with, and you practice it repeatedly at increasing speeds. Start low-ly. Then faster. Then faster. Until faster. Lowly. Then faster. Then faster. Do this for several phrases each day, and over time, you'll find that you're speaking faster and more fluently overall. For example, let's take the phrase, "Actually, I think there might be a better way to approach this problem." Say it slowly at first. Actually, I think there might be a better way to approach this problem. Feel each word as you produce it. Actually, I think there might be a better way to approach this problem. Say it a few more times at normal speed. Now your mouth and brain are connected to this phrase. You can produce it quickly and naturally in a real conversation. Another powerful practice technique is shadowing, which I mentioned earlier, but I want to elaborate on. Shadowing means you listen to a native speaker and immediately repeat after them without pausing. You're trying to match their speed, their rhythm, their intonation as closely as possible. This technique is incredibly powerful for building fluency because you're training multiple things at once. You're training your listening comprehension. You're training your mouth to produce English naturally. You're training your brain to process and produce English quickly. You're training your ear to catch the rhythm and intonation of English. To do shadowing, choose a passage from a podcast, a video, or audiobook, something interesting that you want to understand. Start with passages that are about 30 seconds to 1 minute long. Listen all the way through first to understand the overall meaning. Then play it again, but this time start repeating after the speaker, trying to match their pace and intonation as closely as you can. You're not trying to be perfect. You're training your brain and mouth to work together. Do this for 5 to 10 minutes a day, and the improvement over several weeks is remarkable. Your speed increases, your fluency increases, your confidence increases. This is one technique that I absolutely recommend everyone incorporate into their practice. Another important practice technique is what I call structured conversation practice. This is where you imagine a conversation scenario and you practice playing both sides of the conversation. You speak as yourself and you also speak as the other person. For example, imagine you're at a coffee shop ordering. You say your part. "Hi, I'd like a medium cappuccino, please. Does that come with whipped cream?" Then you switch and say the barista's part. "Yes, it does. Anything else?" Then you respond, "Actually, could I get a blueberry muffin too?" You continue the conversation all the way through. This practice helps you because you're creating a complete, realistic conversation. You're using language you'll actually need in real situations, and you're getting comfortable with back and forth exchange of ideas. One of the things that separates truly skilled English speakers from those who struggle is the ability to adjust their language based on context. You don't speak the same way to your close friends as you do to your boss. You don't speak the same way in a casual conversation as you do in a professional presentation. Understanding these different contexts and learning to shift your language appropriately is crucial for professional and social success. Let me break down the main contexts you'll encounter. First, there's casual conversation with friends or people you know well. This is the most relaxed context. You use contractions, you use slang, you can be less formal. You might say, "Dude, that movie was awesome," or "I can't believe you did that," or "Let's just chill and watch something tonight." Second, there's standard professional or educational context. This is still conversational, but it's more formal than casual. You still use contractions, but you're more thoughtful about word choice. You might say, "I really enjoyed that film," or "That approach might have some challenges," or "I'd like to suggest we consider another option." Third, there's formal professional context, like interviews, presentations, or meetings with senior leadership. In this context, you're more careful about your language. Third, there's formal professional context, like interviews, presentations, or meetings with senior leadership. In this context, you're more careful about your language. You might say, "I found that film particularly engaging," or "That approach presents some potential difficulties that we should address," or "I would like to propose an alternative solution." Fourth, there's technical or specialized context where you need to use specific terminology. This might be in your field of work or study. The vocabulary is very specific and precision is important. You might need to use technical terms that you wouldn't use in casual conversation. Fifth, there's formal written context. This has the highest formality level. The structure is more complex, the vocabulary is more precise, and the tone is more detached. Now, within each of these contexts, you also need to understand tone. Tone is the emotional quality of your speech. You can deliver the same words with different tones, and it completely changes the meaning. The phrase, "That's interesting," can be sincere, sarcastic, dismissive, or intrigued, depending on your tone. In professional contexts, controlling your tone is especially important. You want to sound confident, but not arrogant, interested, but not nosy, certain, but not inflexible, friendly, but not overly casual. This balance is what separates people who are respected in professional settings from those who struggle. Let me give you a practice exercise for shifting between contexts. Take a simple statement like, "The project was difficult, but we finished it." Now say this statement in 5 different contexts and tones. 1. Casual conversation with a friend. "Dude, that project was super tough, but we actually pulled it off." "Yes, you must return audio only." 2. Standard professional conversation. "The project was quite challenging, but we were able to complete it." Your tone is matter of fact. 3. Formal meeting with leadership. I must acknowledge that the project presented significant challenges. However, we successfully brought it to completion. 4. A moment when you're frustrated. The project was incredibly difficult, and frankly, I'm exhausted, but we got it done. 5. Describing a learning experience. The project was challenging, which was actually valuable because it pushed us to develop new skills. Your tone is reflective. Notice how the words might be similar, but the overall expression is completely different. Practicing these shifts helps you become comfortable adjusting your language based on context. One of the most important skills for successful English communication is what to do when things don't go perfectly, and they won't always go perfectly. You'll forget words. You'll mix up grammar. You might misunderstand something. The ability to handle these moments gracefully is what separates skilled communicators from those who are just copying scripts. First, let's talk about what to do when you forget a word. This happens to everyone, including native speakers. The key is handling it smoothly. You have several options. You can try to describe the word in simpler terms. If you forget the word reluctant, you might say, "I'm not really eager to do that. I feel like, how do I say this? I don't want to do it, but I have to." Or you can use a direct phrase like, "I don't remember the word, but what I mean is." This is honest and shows that you're actively thinking about expressing yourself correctly. Most native speakers appreciate this honesty, and they might even offer you the word. Or you can pause and think. You don't always have to fill every silence. It's completely acceptable in conversation to pause and think about what you want to say. In fact, it makes you sound more thoughtful. You might say, "Let me think for a second. What I'm trying to express," then take your time to find the right words. The key is not to panic or get flustered. When you stay calm and focused on communication, other people stay patient and engaged with you. When you panic and apologize excessively, it makes other people uncomfortable. Now let's talk about what to do when you make a grammar mistake. If someone corrects you, a simple response is great. You might say, "Oh, right, thanks for the correction. I meant to say," then state it correctly. By immediately producing the correct version, you're reinforcing the right pattern in your brain. Sometimes you'll notice your own mistake as you're speaking. In this case, you can gently correct yourself. "I went to the store yesterday." Wait, I'll correct myself. "I'm going to the store today." This shows self-awareness and confidence. What you definitely don't want to do is over-apologize or get upset with yourself. "I'm so sorry. I always mix that up. I'm so bad at English." This kind of response draws too much attention to the mistake and makes the conversation uncomfortable. Just smoothly correct and move on. Now, let's talk about misunderstandings, because these happen regularly in real conversations, especially when you're learning. Someone might explain something and you realize you didn't understand, or you understood differently than they intended. In this case, you want to clarify in a way that doesn't make anyone feel bad. You might say, "I want to make sure I understand correctly. Are you saying," or, "So if I'm understanding you correctly, you mean?" These phrases show that you're actively trying to understand and that you want to make sure you've got it right. Another situation is when someone is speaking too fast or you just can't follow. You can ask them to slow down or to explain differently. "Could you slow that down a little bit? I want to make sure I understand." Or, "I'm having trouble following. Could you explain that differently?" These requests are completely reasonable, and native speakers understand them. Here's something I want to be very clear about. Fluency in English is not built through occasional intense study sessions. It's built through consistent, regular practice. This is why creating a sustainable practice routine is so important. The key word here is sustainable. You don't need to study for 3 hours a day and burn out. You need to find a routine that you can maintain consistently, day after day, month after month. Even 30 minutes a day of focused practice will transform your English over a year. Let me give you a framework for building a practice routine that works. First, you need to assess how much time you realistically have available each day. Be honest about this. If you tell yourself you're going to study for 2 hours a day, but you realistically only have 30 minutes, you'll fail and feel bad about yourself. Better to commit to 30 minutes consistently than to commit to 2 hours and quit after a week. Second, break your practice time into different activities. You don't want to do the same thing for your entire practice session because your brain gets tired and your motivation drops. A good routine might include listening, speaking, reading, and studying specific vocabulary or grammar. For example, if you have 30 minutes, you might spend 10 minutes listening to a podcast or video, 10 minutes speaking practice, whether it's shadowing, practicing phrases, or having an imaginary conversation, and 10 minutes reading or studying vocabulary. If you have 45 minutes, you might spend 15 minutes listening, 15 minutes speaking, 10 minutes reading, and 5 minutes reviewing new vocabulary. If you have 60 minutes, you might spend 15 minutes warming up with listening, 20 minutes active speaking practice, 15 minutes reading, and 10 minutes vocabulary and grammar review. The specific breakdown doesn't matter too much. What matters is that you're doing multiple things, you're staying engaged, and you're building different aspects of your language skills. Third, establish a consistent time to practice each day. Your brain actually learns better when it can anticipate practice time. If you practice at the same time every day, your brain starts preparing for that activity and you enter it more easily. Maybe you practice in the morning before work. Maybe you practice during your lunch break. Maybe you practice in the evening before bed. Whatever works for you. Fourth, choose materials that you actually enjoy. If you hate listening to podcasts, don't force yourself to listen to podcasts. If you love movies, use movies for your listening practice. If you love reading, use reading as a significant part of your practice. When you enjoy your materials, you're much more likely to stick with your routine consistently. Fifth, track your progress in some way. This might be a simple notebook where you write down what you practiced each day. It might be keeping a record of podcasts you've listened to or articles you've read. You might track words you've learned or phrases you've mastered. Seeing your progress over weeks and months is incredibly motivating. Sixth, adjust your routine regularly. Every month or two, evaluate what's working and what's not. Maybe you found that a certain type of practice is much more effective for you than you expected. Maybe you've hit a plateau with one activity and you need to change things up. Language learning is a journey, and your routine should evolve as you evolve. Let me give you a sample weekly routine that you can adapt to your schedule. Monday through Friday, you practice 30 minutes each day. Saturday, you do a longer 60-minute session. Sunday, you take a break or do light practice. Your weekday routine: 10 minutes listening to a podcast episode on a topic you're interested in, 10 minutes shadowing or practicing phrases from that podcast, 10 minutes reading a short article or story. Your weekend session: 20 minutes listening to a video or longer podcast, 20 minutes speaking practice through role-playing or conversation, 10 minutes reading something longer, 10 minutes reviewing new vocabulary you've learned during the week. This routine is consistent, it includes different types of practice, it's manageable in terms of time, and it's flexible enough that you can adjust based on what you have available. Technology has made English learning more accessible than ever before. You have access to authentic English materials, interactive tools, and even opportunities to practice with people around the world. But with so many options, it's easy to get overwhelmed or distracted. Let me share with you which tools and resources I think are most valuable for English learners. First, podcasts. Podcasts are an incredible resource because you can listen at your own pace, rewind to listen again, and listen while you're doing other things. Find podcasts on topics that genuinely interest you. If you love sports, find sports podcasts. If you love self-improvement, find self-improvement podcasts. When you're interested in the content, you're much more motivated to listen carefully. YouTube is another fantastic resource. There are channels dedicated to English teaching, but there are also countless channels on every topic imaginable. Start watching content in English with subtitles if needed, and gradually try to watch without subtitles as you improve. Language learning apps can be useful as supplementary tools, but I wouldn't recommend them as your primary source of practice. They're good for vocabulary building and grammar review, but they don't provide the real conversation and communication practice you need. Streaming services like Netflix offer an incredible opportunity to watch English content. Watch shows and movies that interest you. Start with English subtitles if needed. Pay attention to how language is used naturally in conversations. Language exchange apps connect you with native English speakers around the world who want to learn your language. You help them learn your native language, and they help you learn English. This is an incredibly valuable resource for getting real conversation practice with native speakers. Online tutors or conversation partners, whether paid or through language exchange, provide personalized feedback and correction that helps you improve faster. Even one session a week with a tutor can make a significant difference. Reading materials are important. Start with easier materials like news articles, simple blogs, or young adult books. Gradually work your way up to more complex materials like news magazines, novels, and nonfiction books. Reading exposes you to vocabulary in context and helps you understand grammar patterns naturally. Now, I want to give you a warning. It's easy to spend so much time looking for resources and switching between different apps and platforms that you don't actually practice consistently with any single resource. You need to choose your main resources and commit to them. I recommend selecting 3 main resources: one for listening, one for speaking/conversation, and one for reading. Then commit to using those resources consistently for at least a month before evaluating whether to switch. This consistency is much more valuable than constantly trying new things. For example, your main resources might be a podcast you love for listening, a language exchange app for speaking practice, and a blog or news site for reading practice. You use these 3 resources consistently, and they form the core of your practice. You might supplement with other materials, but these 3 are your main focus. One thing I want to prepare you for is that language learning isn't a straight line of continuous improvement. There are periods where you feel like you're making rapid progress, and then there are plateaus where it feels like you're not improving at all. Both are completely normal. When you first start learning English, you often experience rapid progress. You learn basic phrases, you start being able to have simple conversations, you're thrilled by how much you're improving. This is wonderful, but it doesn't last forever. After several months or a year of study, the rate of improvement often slows down. You're still improving, but it's more subtle and it doesn't feel as obvious. This is called a plateau, and it's actually a sign that you're moving from beginner to intermediate levels. The beginner level has lots of low-hanging fruit. You learn basic vocabulary, and immediately you can communicate more. But as you advance, each new word or skill has less obvious impact. How do you handle a plateau? First, you need to expect it and know that it's normal. This mentally prepares you so you don't get discouraged. Second, you need to evaluate your practice. Are you still challenging yourself? Or have you become comfortable with your current level and you're not pushing yourself anymore? Often, pushing through a plateau requires increasing the difficulty or changing your approach. Third, you should focus on different aspects of your English. Maybe you've been focused on vocabulary and you're hitting a limit there. Maybe you need to shift your focus to listening comprehension or speaking fluency. Changing your focus can reignite your progress. Fourth, remember why you're learning English in the first place. Is it for a job? Is it to travel? Is it to connect with people? Is it for personal growth? When you feel unmotivated, connecting back to your original purpose can reignite your passion. Now let's talk about motivation more broadly, because motivation is what keeps you going when things get difficult. External motivation, like needing English for a job, helps you start learning, but internal motivation, which comes from within you, is what sustains learning over the long term. Some ways to build internal motivation are to connect your English learning to things you genuinely enjoy. If you love music, use English songs. If you love movies, watch English movies. If you love reading, read. When you're learning English through things you love, learning doesn't feel like work. It feels like play. Another way to build motivation is to set meaningful goals. Instead of a vague goal like improve my English, set specific goals like I want to have a 10-minute conversation with a native speaker in English. Or I want to read a complete novel in English. Or I want to give a presentation in English at work. Specific goals give you something concrete to work toward. Celebrate your progress, even small progress. If you have your first conversation in English, celebrate it. If you understand a podcast episode, celebrate it. If you learn 5 new words, celebrate it. These celebrations, even if they're small, keep you motivated to continue. Connect with other English learners. Find a community, whether online or in person, of people also learning English. Share your challenges, celebrate your wins, and support each other. Learning doesn't have to be a solitary journey. Now, I want to focus on something that separates people who can technically communicate in English from people who truly speak English fluently. It's about flow and naturalness. It's about speaking in a way that sounds like genuine communication rather than recitation. Speaking with natural flow means several things. First, your words connect smoothly. You're not speaking word by word with pauses between each word. You're speaking in chunks and phrases that flow together. Second, your pronunciation and intonation sound natural. You're using the rhythm and melody of English, not the rhythm of your native language. Third, you're not translating in your head. You're thinking directly in English and producing language fluidly from those English thoughts. Fourth, you're adjusting to your listener and the situation in real time. You're listening to how they're responding and adjusting your speech accordingly. Building fluency in natural flow takes practice, but there are specific techniques that help. First, practice speaking at natural speed. Many learners practice slowly and carefully because they're thinking about pronunciation and grammar. But this creates a habit of slow speech. Instead, practice at natural speed, even if it means some words aren't perfect. Second, use linking and reduction. In rapid English speech, words connect together, sounds blend, vowels reduce. Didya becomes didya. Want to becomes wanna. Going to becomes gonna. These are natural patterns of English speech. When you use them, you sound more natural and fluent. Third, use pauses strategically. Pausing isn't a sign of difficulty. Skilled speakers use pauses to give themselves time to think, to let important information sink in for the listener, and to emphasize certain points. A well-placed pause makes you sound more thoughtful and in control. Fourth, use fillers strategically. Fillers like well, you know, I mean, are part of natural English speech. They give you time to think without awkward silence. But use them sparingly, not constantly. 1 or 2 fillers per minute sounds natural. 5 or 6 sounds unsure. Fifth, practice thinking groups and stress patterns. Within each sentence, there are natural groupings of words that belong together. I went to the store to buy groceries, but they were closed. The slashes represent natural breaks in speech. When you speak in these natural groupings with appropriate stress on important words, you sound much more fluent. Let me give you a specific fluency-building exercise. Choose a short paragraph from a book or article that you find interesting. Read it out loud at normal speed, trying to sound natural. Don't pause between words. Let the words flow together. Focus on natural rhythm and intonation rather than perfect pronunciation. Then record yourself reading the paragraph. Listen to it. Notice where your speech sounds natural and where it sounds choppy or unnatural. Identify specific places where you could improve flow or naturalness. Then read it again, paying attention to those specific areas. Do this exercise regularly, and you'll notice that your overall speech becomes more fluent and natural. Your brain learns the patterns of natural English speech, and you start producing them automatically. For many learners, speaking English professionally is where the real pressure is. Whether it's meetings, presentations, negotiations, or important conversations with colleagues, these situations feel high stakes, and that can make you nervous. The key to professional confidence is preparation combined with mindset. You can't control every variable in a professional situation, but you can prepare yourself for the most likely scenarios. And you can shift your mindset so that you're not paralyzed by fear of making mistakes. Let me give you specific techniques for professional English situations. If you have an important meeting, prepare in advance. Know what topics are likely to come up. Prepare key phrases and expressions you might need. Think about questions people might ask you and how you'll respond. For presentations, you have even more control. You can practice your presentation multiple times until you're comfortable with the content and the delivery. You can prepare for likely questions. You can anticipate areas where you might struggle and practice those specifically. For negotiations or important conversations, prepare talking points. Know what you want to communicate. Practice expressing your points clearly and persuasively. Think about objections you might face and how you'll respond. The beautiful thing about professional preparation is that it reduces your anxiety. When you've prepared, you're not going into a situation unprepared and hoping for the best. You're going in with a plan. This dramatically increases your confidence. Now, regarding mindset, I want to address imposter syndrome because many non-native English speakers experience it in professional settings. You might feel like you don't belong in the meeting or the position because you speak with an accent or you're not as fast with words as native speakers. Here's the truth. Your non-native English speaker status isn't a liability in most professional settings. In fact, it can be an asset. Many of your colleagues probably speak English as a non-native language too. Your perspective as someone from a different culture and background is valuable. What matters in professional settings is whether you can communicate your ideas clearly, whether you're competent at your job, and whether you're professional in your interactions. None of these require a native English accent or perfect grammar. So I want you to shift from thinking, I'm not a native speaker, so I'm not good enough, to thinking, I'm communicating in a language that's not my native language, which is actually pretty impressive, and I'm competent at my job. So I want you to shift from thinking, I'm not a native speaker, so I'm not good enough, to thinking, I'm communicating in a language that's not my native language, which is actually pretty impressive, and I'm competent at my job. It wants to do things automatically without thinking. That's why habits are so powerful and so hard to change. When you first start practicing English, you have to think about everything. You think about pronunciation, grammar, word choice. Your brain is working hard. Over time, with repeated practice, these things start moving into your automatic processes. Your brain doesn't have to think so hard anymore. You just produce English. This is why consistency is so important. Every time you practice, you're strengthening the neural pathways for English. Your brain is learning that English is something you do regularly and automatically. But if you practice sporadically, you're not strengthening those pathways. You're constantly starting from scratch. It takes roughly 66 days of consistent daily practice for a new habit to become automatic. So if you commit to practicing English for 30 minutes every day for about 2 months, English practice will become an automatic habit for you. You'll crave it. You'll feel weird on days you don't do it. It will be part of your daily routine. Another important thing about habits is that they need to be easy to implement. If your habit is too difficult or complicated, you won't stick with it. So make your English practice easy. If you like podcasts, listen to podcasts. If you like speaking with people, find language exchange partners. Don't force yourself to do types of practice you hate. Also, habits need to be tied to existing routines. Instead of trying to find extra time for English practice, tie it to something you already do. Listen to English podcasts during your commute. Watch English videos while you're having your coffee in the morning. Read English news while you're eating lunch. When you tie your practice to existing routines, it becomes so much easier to maintain consistently. As we wrap up this conversation, I want to remind you of something really important. Learning English to fluency is absolutely achievable for you. It's not a matter of talent or natural ability. It's a matter of consistent practice over time. Regular people like you and me learn to speak fluent English all the time. You can too. Remember, fluency isn't about perfection. It's about clarity and confidence. It's about being able to express yourself and understand others. It's about connecting with people across language barriers. That's what's really beautiful about language fluency. The roadmap I've shared with you today is simple. Build your foundation with chunks and phrases. Practice thinking in English. Build consistency through daily habits. Adjust your language based on context. And most importantly, believe in yourself. Every single day you practice is an investment in your future. Even small daily practice adds up over time. In a year of consistent practice, your English will transform. You'll be able to have conversations you can only imagine now. You'll be able to do things professionally in English that seem impossible now. So as you leave this podcast episode, I want you to make one commitment. Pick one thing from what I've shared today and start doing it tomorrow. Maybe it's thinking in English for 5 minutes a day. Maybe it's practicing a specific phrase repeatedly. Maybe it's starting a daily podcast listening habit. Pick one thing and commit to it for the next week. Then after a week, add another practice. Then after another week, add another. Gradually, you're building a complete practice routine that works for you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. This conversation means so much to me because I genuinely believe that learning English fluently can transform your life. It opens doors, it connects you with people, it expands your world. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss future episodes. Check out our podcast playlist for more content on English learning, speaking fluency, and communication skills. You've got this. I believe in you. Keep practicing, stay consistent, and speak English with confidence. I'm Lily, and I'll see you in the next episode. Keep going. You're doing amazing.